Oh fellas, PV2 Smurf here. Is it just me or every single time a woman says, hey, drive my car, it's always making a noise? I mean, always. It's never, hey, drive my car, it's already full of gas. Drive my car. Because you don't like, yours needs oil changing. Mine's good. Never drive my car. Your eyes a little smoother. It says, drive my car, it's making a noise. Well, we're driving it now, ain't we? Guess what? Yep, you guessed it. Guess what? It's making a noise. We're gonna fix it. Yep. You got a Nissan Maxima? Well, we about to tinker with this and stick around. Hey fellas, PV2 Smurf here. PV2 Smurf here. PV2 Smurf here. Oh fellas, PV2 Smurf here. So wife previously states, vehicle making knocking sound. Well, I don't know about you, but when I hear the term knocking sound, I'm thinking, wowee, detrimental engine issue. Especially when you look at the odometer of a vehicle, like hers, it's got over 200,000 on it. You're like, uh-oh, it's toast. So basically, how do we go about figuring out where the noise is coming from? Some kind of indication. Well, so the noise on this thing, in order to figure out which area it's actually located at on the actual vehicle, what I ended up doing was I drove the vehicle, it's sitting, it has no noise. When the vehicle is in motion, it has noise. So then while the vehicle's in motion, I put it in, so I'm driving down the road while the vehicle's in motion, put it in neutral, still have the same noise. I was able to determine it was the front wheel, which is why we're looking at this wheel. The way I was able to determine it was the front or the rear was all the noise was coming from the front, for one. For two, the vibration was coming from the steering wheel. So when I'm sitting inside the vehicle, got my hands on the wheel, and there's a vibration. Well, if you feel it in the steering wheel, it's in the front wheels. You'll feel it in your rear end. Rear wheels, rear end. There you go. So determining it's this wheel specifically is the noise is faint into the left side of the vehicle while driving. Another thing I kind of got to is when you're driving the vehicle, when you make a right-hand turn or going around a right-hand curve, the noise stops, which tells me something's probably not tight, or the bearing, when it turns just to the right, a fuzz and gets pressure on in a certain way, stops making noises. Commonly in the past, I've found that these are mostly hub and wheel bearing assemblies, which are bad on vehicles. Whenever you make a turn and the noise stops one way or the other, then it's usually always been that in the case. So what we're going to do is we're going to diagnose and fix this noise coming from the front left or left front portion of this vehicle, which I'm assuming is probably this tire, this hub assembly, and we're going to fix it. I am pretty sure I went over this in a previous video, but I'm just going to do a quick recap in case it didn't. Remove the tires. The lugs on the tires are 21 millimeter. Then, since we want to access and check the actual hub, because I believe that's the issue, if you're going to change your brakes, remove the brake caliper. You want a 14 millimeter bolt here, 14 millimeter bolt right down here. But we're going to be removing the entire assembly. Includes this, I think they call it a torque plate in the service manual, can't remember. We're moving all this, and we want to use, as we've used previously, our piece of clothes hanger here. I'm going to hang it up here so we can get it out of the way. So that way we can access to check the bearings in this hub. So to do that, when looking at it this way, to remove this entire assembly here, backing plate, there's a bolt here, there's one down here that I've already removed, and these are 19 millimeters. Now these do have a torque spec, but I usually tighten them pretty good with a little blue thread locker. You can go to put it on there. But these are 19, and then once I do that, we'll just remove this bolt all the way. Then we're just gonna hang it up so it's up here out of the way. Now we got this brake caliper bracket and the entire assembly hung. One thing you want to remember to make sure you do is see the brake hose. You have to buy that hose. That's not something you can assemble together. So you want to make sure you don't pinch that off. You want to make sure there's no stress pulling on that. So we'll hang it up, make sure it's secure. Now we can move forward with moving the rotor. See how easy that was? That's why I put anti-seize on this right here. As we're all aware previously, I placed the CV axles on this vehicle previously. Look right up here, and right here will be a link to actually watch the video. So a good thing is, while I'm already in here and have access, is to check to make sure that it did seat all the way and it's not leaking around the seal where it comes out of the transaxle. So if I look back in here, and you get light, you can tell you, like that, no fluid spots. If there's no fluid spots down in here, that means it must have seated properly all the way. That's not an issue. Now we're going to remove something I feel has always been a pain in the butt because it broke in 4 or 5 different instances in my time of working on things. The ABS sensor. If you don't remember the ABS sensor breaking, located right here will be a link to the video where the ABS sensor broke and how we fixed that issue. This one should not break, however, because I have removed it previously. This hose right here, this piece will come off. Make sure to remember the routing of the ABS line. Take this off. One. Following that line all the way around the back here, this piece right here actually goes up and comes off. See that went up and come off? Then we can tuck this out of the way. We don't have to worry about any issues of this getting ripped or torn or cut and having to replace it. The rear one slides up. Front one slides out. This ABS sensor holder right here, this is a 12 millimeter bolt. Unloosen this. And I've removed this one before, so it's coming off rather easy. Just wiggle. See, I coated that previously. See the coating around it? That's the reason why it come out so easy. It's another reason why I urge you all to do that if you're going to remove one of these. We can set this out of the way so the cable does not get damaged on it. Quick inspection, don't see any issues with it at all. I'm going to set it out of the way. So now what we're going to do is just continue disassembly. Move the cotter pin that holds the CV axle on. Remove the nut. The torque spec of this I think is 208 foot-pounds. I'll post it right here later on in the video. One thing I noticed, I was able to take this off using a crescent wrench. If I could use a crescent wrench to remove this with little to no force, more than likely this was not tightened or torqued properly. So it's not setting the correct amount of preload on this bearing, this hub assembly right here. So my assumption is it could just be it wasn't tight enough. So what you could do is try torquing this back down, reassemble all this, drive it, see if you still have this noise, and if it doesn't make the noise. Now this not being tight enough could be the issue. And I say that because if you're driving down the road, it's loose and makes a noise, but when you turn the wheel to the right, it binds this shaft a little bit where it moves around inside this hub assembly. And when it moves it, when you're taking the wheel to the right, puts a little pressure against it, it stops. It could just be this hub assembly is fine, but this bearing in here doesn't have enough preload. But when you make the turn, it's adding more load to it, and when it does, therefore it's stopping the noise that it's making. So if that's your issue, try that before you actually go and buy the hub assembly and install the hub assembly. In my case, I'm unfamiliar if I've actually replaced the hub assembly on this side. I don't believe I have. I believe I replaced the entire assembly on the passenger side. I know I did, but not particularly on this side. So I'm just, for good measure, just going to replace this assembly, so that way I know for a fact it's not an issue, because everything else on this side has been replaced, including brakes, rotors, so on and so forth. So I'm just going to replace mine. However, you want to try that. It's a good tip to save you some money, because not that the hub assembly is expensive, but it has to be pressed out, and the new one has to be pressed in. If you don't have access to a press, it could be an issue. Now, you could always freeze this hub assembly here. In the process of freezing it, get it out of the freezer, drop it down in the assembly, and tap it into place. However, the most optimal method is using a press. I have access to a press. I don't own one, but I have access to one. So I chose to use a press and replace just the hub bearing itself because I have access to a press. This is the bearing. This is the bearing type that I use, not a specific one. This is the price for the bearing. Assuming you have to factor in having somebody to press it in or out, will change the variance on this, also depending on which bearing, because there is a 1-year warranty bearing, then there is a better brand or premium brand bearing that you can use that has a higher cost. In the event you decide you don't want to do this and you don't have a press, you just need to bolt it on and go on about your way. You need this to get to work, you need it to go pick your kids up, whatever it is you have to do, you can go with this option. Now with this one right here, it already has everything already pre-assembled. All you have to do is unbolt the one that's bolted on the car right now. You can take that one completely loose, take it, put it in your scrap metal pile, haul it off to the scrap yard later if you'd like. Take this new one, you set it right on there, and you bolt it in. However, be cautious that each one of these are different per side, so each one have a different part number. But this is the completed assembled one, but this is the price of the completed assembled one. So it's a chunk of change, ain't it? So if you don't have that much and you want to try to go the other route, make sure you're prepared. Especially with the coronavirus things going around, a lot of shops are backed up and don't have adequate time to reach you in your project to get this pressed out. This may be the option. You might have to bite the bullet and take this option. But these are your two options that you have, as you can see here. Choose whichever one you like. Another common sign that tells me this is the hub assembly is because with that bolt all the way, with the nut all the way in here, it shouldn't have any play at all. But as you can tell, well, I don't know if you can tell, but I can feel it. Just barely. You can feel the play in it, and you can hear it. See it moving? Like it should move left and right, but up and down. See that? Shouldn't have any of that. That slop, I'm going to call it, or slack in this bearing. That's what's causing the roaring issue going down the road. Hear that? Shouldn't have that. This is a roaring issue, and we're going to address that. Quickly on how to go about removing this, as I've covered this previously, but I'll recover it again. The nut is a 19 millimeter. There's two of them. I already removed one. The bolt is a 17 millimeter head. So basically all I had to do is put a wrench on here and lay it down like this, and then I could take my impact and take it off. And the reason being is because I put medium strength thread locker on this bolt before to get it off. That will remove this, but I left one on, and the reason being is I don't want this wobbling around and moving around, because in order to remove this entire assembly to get to the hub assembly, we have to remove the tie rod end. We also have to remove the ball joint. Now, don't ask me why, but the ball joint down here is an odd size. The size of this nut is a 22 millimeter, which is odd size, so you can either wrench you a set. I don't know if you'll find a 22, or buy you a socket, but you'll have to have one to get it. So you just remove the cotter pins on it, remove the nut, and then you may have to get one of those tools that spreads this apart in order to come out. I actually have one. Don't know if I need it. Sometimes they'll come out. Usually they don't always come out. They'll end up spinning in here, and they spin the whole ball joint. So keep in mind, but these are easy. So you remove this, 22 millimeter, remove the cotter pin out of this, take this bolt loose. This bolt for the tie rod end located right here is a 19 millimeter. So in this instance, I lucked out. I've loosened this 19 millimeter, hit this with a ball peen hammer. So I did that, two pieces separated. ready to continue moving forward progress. Important note to make whenever you're going to take this tie rod in loose, check the boot. Is the boot damaged? Does it got a mark on it? Is it leaking? Is it broke anywhere? If it is, you may need to replace this. However, remember, when you go to replace this, it has to be aligned after it's replaced. See this jam nut? This is how they go about adjusting your alignment. So if you break this loose, it's got a spot here to set a wrench on, or and usually a crescent wrench, and then another wrench on this. So if you go to put this on, you break this loose, you will have to get this vehicle aligned. But if this boot is bad or this is bad, you replace this tie rod in, it's got excessive slack in it. Just keep that in mind. Now removing this ball joint, you have two options. After you remove the tie rod in, you could turn this freely. So you can turn this around like this. You might be able to get a crescent wrench in there to get it loose, you might not. The other option you have, so the options you have, if you have a bolt that's still in here like I do to keep this from moving, remove this bolt here. Once you do that, that'll allow you to give access to take this axle shaft, CV axle shaft, push it back through. This will all lay down. You'll be able to reach it with a 22mm socket. Either option you want to do is fine, but just want to let you know that you cannot put a socket or fit a socket in this tight space that's located right down here where the ball joint's at currently with the CV axle in it. It'll have to be removed in order to access it, just so you know. As you can see, by removing this, getting this out of the way, fit your socket on here and your axle's out of the way, which is perfect if you want to use a socket like I am. If not, you want to do it with a crescent wrench and just remove it the other way, you can, but you might as well go ahead and take all this apart, because if you're going to press the bearing in or replace this piece, you're going to have it off. So you might as well just go ahead and just take it loose. But entirely it's your decision on what you want to do. As I said, your rig, your call. In order to remove it, since I have a deep well, I have to use a swivel. Put it on here. Oops. Loosen it up. Once I got it pretty well loose, took a hammer, turn this thing around to the other side, tap on it. Tap on it to separate. Once it separates, nut off all the way. There's your hub assembly. With it on the bench, you can hear it. Can't really hear it very good right here. But you can see there's slop in this bearing. See how it's moving? That bearing, the inside of that bearing is no good. So you decide you're going to remove this and you're just going to press this thing out and just going to buy one because it's $40 to get you back on the road. And I understand, you know, times are hard. The COVID and every other thing going on, you know. So how we go about removing this? Well, it's pretty simple. It's not very difficult to remove. Give you a couple heads up and you're replacing this bearing. Inside of it, as I showed you previously, there's a snap ring. Also, on the other side is a snap ring on the other side that holds this bearing. And there's two parts here. When you buy the bearing, you just get this outer part. This is part of your spindle, which goes and works where your tires are at, this piece here. So if you want to press this out, let me run you through how to do this. Get your new bearing. Make sure your socket will slide through the new bearing, which will be this. Make sure it go all the way through it, move around some. Then, you want to put it on a press. Set that bearing on that, set that socket that go all the way through on this part, on that press. Push it down, and it'll push this inner spindle part out. Once it pushes it out, then what I done was took it, since I already had the back one loose, took it, flipped it over, and push this bearing back out through so it'll be flipped the other way. Now, when you go to reassemble it, put the bearing back in here, this outer bearing, put it in here, put the snap ring on it. Then, what you want to do is you want to take what I ended up getting was a socket and set it on the inside diameter. We'll set it on the outside. Anyway, set it on this. So we'll set it like this right here on the press. Then what I done was just set the socket I used to push this out with. It's a pretty big socket, by the way. Set it on here like this, and as I push down when I'm doing it, it'll push the spindle through, and you can tell when it goes in. And so you remember the old bearing wobbled and stuff? No movement at all. And they are going to be a little stiff where it's new. That's just a little helpful hint to help you start trying to push on this because there's a snap ring that's on the other side of it. And if you do, you're going to end up cracking this entire housing, and then you'll have to buy the entire assembly. At this point, it will cost you less to buy the bearing, swing by a garage somewhere and say, hey man, how much you charge me to press this out and press this in? $20. That's $20. They'll take this loose. They'll press this out. They'll press your new one in. They'll put that back in for you. All you got to do is bring it back and reassemble it. But like I said, your rig, your call, you do it any way you want. But if you're going to replace just the hub bearing, this is the process. The other one, if you got the actual entire bearing piece all together, it comes with all this. So all this comes together, plate, all this. All you have to do is grab it, buy a new one, $250, $60, and bolt it back on the vehicle. You're ready to go. But your rig, your call. All right, so you can see it's removed. One thing I like to do when I pull these out, taking just sand them just a little bit, so that way they'll fit back in there just a little better, because sometimes they have a lot of stuff and build up. You can see it's pitted really bad through there, and those is where water gets back inside here, so you want to make sure that you clean this off pretty good with a little sandpaper. Now all you have to do is get this to the press. Hey fellas, I appreciate you for tuning in on the video. If I have anything that I missed, could have done a little bit better or whatever, let me know in the comment section below. As always guys, remember, your rig, your call.